Now, for those of you who would like to submit questions via Zoom, you can use our Q&A feature by clicking on the chat icon. You do have the option of making yourself anonymous, so just tick that box and that will hide your name from the Q&A. Next slide, please. All right, some webinar etiquettes for you all to follow on Zoom. You can please make sure that your audio is muted, and if you don't mind just holding off one moment. Okay, looks like we have that worked out. So please make sure that you are muted on your device, and also make sure that your video is off. If you want to make sure that you have a high quality connection, please make sure that you close all tabs and applications that might be open on your computer. For those of you who are on Zoom, but also here with us in person, we ask that you please maintain a respectful and professional tone. If you don't know, Dr. Andrew J. Foster is a pioneer within Black deaf education. He is the founding father of deaf education in Africa as well. He is an alumnus of Gallaudet, class of 1954. His work is notable. Everyone here knows who Andrew Foster is and the amazing work that he's done for deaf children. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Akilah English, who did research on disrupting the anti-Blackness in K-12 deaf education through a critical Black deaf theory framework. Please join me on stage, Dr. Akilah English.
Thank you so much, Giovanna. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just double checking for folks at home. Can you see me clearly? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Akilah English. I'm thrilled to see full house, some new faces, and also some familiar faces. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. This is my first presentation with my dissertation since after my defense. So you all are fortunate to be here today. And as the slide shows, disrupting anti-Blackness in K-12 education through a Black deaf critical theory framework. This is a very personal story to me as a Black deaf woman. And so I'm happy today to share more about my work. I do want to share a disclaimer. This dissertation, when I went through it, as I interviewed Black deaf participants, they shared really rawly, and so there are terms that may be triggering. I don't want to filter or remove their experiences, so I just want to let you know slurs may also come up. So yes, Dr. Akilah English, who am I? Where do I come from? Do I look the same? This is the first picture over here. I was around 5, maybe 6, 7 years old. I grew up going to a mainstream program, and I became deaf at 2 years old. I started signing a little bit at 2, and then after I got into Gallaudet, graduated, I started becoming a teacher for the deaf. And I've spent over 16 years in deaf education. And I believe deaf students really inspired me to do this work, and also inspired me to do my dissertation focusing on K-12 education. So are we ready to dive into this problem? As you can see on the slide, K-12 schools are a site of Black suffering. That means the education system, schools are not designed for deaf Black students. They're actually, they humanize them, and it's not a safe space for them. And so that also, we can think about policies, practices that also neglect and erase the Black deaf students. We also think about education policies, practices that are influenced by white supremacist beliefs and discrimination against Black students. So if we think about the teachers in the systems, they're typically white, and also the policymakers are. And so that means how they create those policies are supportive of the white experience. Anti-Black ideologies in impact Black deaf students, their intellectuality, academically, socially, and emotionally. So that means if these systems aren't designed for them, they are unable to thrive. They're unable to get access to education to help them succeed in the future. As I began my research, I found these particular gaps. I focused on anti-Blackness. And before I begin, I wanted to ask if you are aware of the difference between racism and anti-Blackness. So racism is the discrimination against people of color in general, but if we're focusing on the Black community, African-American community, anti-Blackness is a discrimination particularly on that racial group. And so if we're thinking about how we support Black deaf students, there aren't a lot of research to do so and education materials. So there's that gap. And so there's no discussion on how to support them navigating this white-dominated system. And so I wanted to really look into this problem because research doesn't show how they're navigating these systems that aren't designed for them. And at Akilah University, we may read about education and access, language deprivation, language acquisition, but we often don't see the conversation about race there, and we must center race. Here is my research question. First question, what stories do Black deaf adults tell us about anti-Blackness in K-12 deaf education? When I met with my participants, I wanted to ask them about their experience. I told them to tell me their stories. What did it look like at their schools? My second question focuses on K-12 deaf education being designed over time and how that perpetuates anti-Blackness through those policies.
Since
as early as 1817. We see these systems have been designed against and erasing the Black experience and Black people in general. All right, let's get to my theoretical frameworks. I want to start with critical race theory, also known as CRT. And this study focuses on how race shows up in our everyday lives, shows up when we're accessing housing, education, and just how we're navigating every day. And so I wanted to start using this framework because I believe that race is already missing in general conversation, but what about the Black experience and also the Black deaf experience? I also have to talk about Black critical theory and how often there's that school-to-prison pipeline for Black students. And there's this high percent of students are suspended who are Black, high percentage of them have white teachers, or are in special education. So I saw this already impacting Black students, and I believe the deaf experience is missing here too. And as Black deaf individuals, we have the epistemology of our experiences, and we also have to be recognized as both Black and deaf. And we show up within those intersectionalities of those identities, and they cannot be ignored. So from there, I included deaf critical theory. So this was great because it finally added the deaf component of the experience of being deaf, but it also does not include the racial aspect. So finally, I was able to work with Dr. Carla Garcia-Fernandez, the director of Nuestra Casa, and she did the work focusing on the Latinx deaf community. And so I thought, how could I apply her work to my own community as a Black deaf woman? So here is where I create the Black deaf critical theory. Listed here are the components. And first let's start with anti-Blackness and how it is an endemic and rooted in the system and cannot be dismantled. Also the persuasiveness of whiteness and how it's dominant in our culture. and also hearingness as property. So I'm sure we live, we think about this world and how hearing people are given the privilege and the opportunity to navigate easier than deaf people. And also intersectionality. We have to think about the many facets of an individual. They're not just their racial or deafness. They could be queer, et cetera, and the many different parts of their identity. And then also navigating their stories and the system through counter stories and how we resist the system and the oppression against us. And so we have to remember that there's this white lens that dominates our experiences. So if we tell our counter stories, we're also able to navigate the system successfully. So let's go to the data. I know you're all ready to see the results. Here are the six Black deaf participants that were included in my research. I will be sharing their quotes from the interviews, and I will also be signing them directly. They'll also be on their PowerPoint. These are raw, authentic stories from the participants. They're all Black deaf individuals who all graduated from a deaf residential school. Next slide. This is Kalan. They attended a segregated deaf residential school. And this was before schools were desegregated. Before she got to this deaf residential school, because she attended a mainstream school, they required her to take an assessment to see where she would be placed. This was her response when she was sharing that experience. The psychologist asked me, pointing to a pen, and she said, "What's this?" And I looked at her and I couldn't believe that woman was asking me. I looked at her and I said in my mind, I'm like, are you being serious right now? Do you think I'm dumb? The next participant, Ko-Ningen. They're from a Black family. Their parents graduated from a segregated residential school. And for this story, they were talking about their experience going to an athletic event on a bus. And they were with other students. So it was a co-ed, a bus. And when they were on the bus, there was someone sharing through a window. So this is their response when the boys got angry. So after that, the immature boys got angry. So they started to call me nigger. I mean, they didn't have a good reason to say it. They were messing with me, messing with my shoes. Students called me horse teeth and then would bully me. I would just say quiet. They would say, oh, you have a big ass. The third participant used the pseudonym name of Pete. And the residential school they went to had a strong Catholic background. And so they did struggle with their own identity going to that school. And the quote says, I wasn't getting much help compared to the Latinx students, and other students seemed to get a lot more. The sisters would take students to the church once a week. But we, the Black deaf students, did not go. We already had our own churches. There was more of a division between us and them. Big Mike grew up at a residential school, and they're from Jamaica, of the Caribbean background. And they did, when going to classes, they would transition going through the stairs. And so this experience was them going from one classroom to the next and how a counselor pushed them. The counselor told me to get up right after I fell. I asked the counselor, why did you push me? He said, he told me to get up. And I tried to report it, but the counselor and the students covered it up, and they were saying I made it up. The students did not confirm because the counselor was their favorite. I didn't even tell my mom. The next participant, Amma, came from a racially mixed family and also a deaf and hearing family. They felt that they came from a school where points were given and as a reward within the education that they went to, but it was a very strict system. So Amma shared, it was a very strict system, so it was hard to accumulate points. I got to the point where I kept messing up to the point that I wouldn't be allowed to go out. I kept losing points, and it was because I was making facial expressions, and they would deduct points. What the fuck? Tori identified as queer and was the youngest participant out of all six. Tori was sharing their experience growing up at a residential school, but how they didn't have a lot of access to written English. They shared sometimes my grammar and language usage were incorrect. Teachers would correct my paper, and she made a lot of corrections. Like my paper was bleeding red. I felt blamed for not knowing English well enough. I wasn't exposed to enough written English. So all of those narratives and those stories are direct quotes from the participants. So with that, I created the key findings. So what I did is go through all of the data and recognize that all six participants had very similar experiences.
And so what we noticed was that a lot of what they brought wasn't valued. And we also see that a lot of them felt singled out. They felt that they were Black in a predominantly white academic setting. And they also noticed that in vocational settings, it was the opposite. So that's a similarity we noticed across all narratives. Something else I observed was the teachers' racial biases. Oftentimes, teachers would essentially doubt the skills of the students. Now, some of the participants did start off at a mainstream program and then later transferred to a residential school. Despite the accolades and the achievements that they had in those mainstream programs, their abilities and skills were questioned once they arrived to that residential school. And then the erasure of Black deaf history. They weren't aware of their own history until later on in their adult life. Some were familiar with the basics of Andrew J. Foster, but other than that, they were unaware of the Black deaf history that existed. And this is a quote from Amma. I was the only Black person in class, and I was top of the class. I was the only Black person in the class, so I had to do better. If I failed in something, they would say, oh, it's because you're Black, and that I must be in the wrong class. I didn't want them to think that. Oh, hell no. I was competitive and motivated to be at the top of the class at all times. And this is from Pete. The teachers continued to doubt my skills. They would be shocked at my academic skills because I won awards. They were shocked that I was even in a mainstream school, and I was on the dean's list there. When I read a book, they didn't expect me to know certain things when I would send in my assignments or papers. And what we find is that they not only struggled academically because of the perception, but they also struggled to engage in student activities, right? Socializing was really challenging for them. There were two groups, right? There were a group of participants who did have access to Black deaf clubs or organizations, but didn't receive any encouragement, right? And so they just did it on a limb. They joined the SVG, they joined Junior and NAD, and all of those different organizations, but no one really encouraged them to do that. And then there's a group of students who were unaware of the resources that were available to them, specifically tailored to Black deaf people. And then we have athletes, right, who were really great at what they did, but their academic skills were ignored and they were exploited because of their skills. And essentially, the school was riding on their academic skills and not necessarily them as a student. And then you have a group of students who might have thought that they were really good at this one sport, but they didn't get a lot of play time. This quote is from Koningen. I didn't know about NVDA until later when I went to university. I wish I knew about NVDA during my middle school or high school time. I would have been involved. I would have learned about my Black culture. I took deaf culture at my deaf school, but the curriculum didn't include any Black deaf history. Deaf culture is great, but where's the curriculum that incorporates Black deaf history? Another key finding that we noticed across all experiences was that punitive experience, right? When it came to unfair procedures or policies. Students either reported that they were suspended over very minor things, or was sent to ISS, in school suspension because of some minor activities. If someone pronounced the word incorrectly, they would be physically punished for that. If someone accidentally hurt someone from, let's say, falling off a bike, they would be suspended from the pleasure or leisure of using a bike. School administrators mistreatment. It could be that a assistant principal would often target Black deaf students. For example, Connington talked about how the teacher told him that he wasn't smart enough and that he wouldn't make it to university or college. And then you have experiences like people like Big Mike. Who was always accused or thought to be of blame when something happened. And was always singled out. This is a quote from Tori. I was just yelling in class, and so I got in trouble and was suspended for 3 days just for yelling. Now, this is more of an output that Tori made auditorily, and it was something that they couldn't really help, not necessarily yelling on purpose. And so Tori got in trouble for that. And one of the last key findings from the narratives that I observed during this research was late identification and code switching. All six Black deaf participants did not have a proud sense of identity until their adult life or later in college or after high school. All right, so they knew that deafness as a culture existed, but they didn't really understand it as an identity until later in life. And code switching. A lot of them had to get rid of what made them feel comfortable, right? Some of them really liked wearing those cool Michael Jordan shoes, wearing really stylish outfits, but they had to really conform to the setting that they were in. Sometimes even going as far as straightening their hair. This quote from Big Mike, they prepared me as a deaf person, but not as a Black deaf person. I was more prepared as a Black deaf person through community-based organizations, and they helped me prepare for the Black deaf experience. So again, we see the erasure of this culture and identity and the understanding of this in academia, and how this person only had access to this through their community, not at school. These stories are really heartening and raw. With that, I was very emotional. Candid in saying that. But as I really took a close analysis on their stories and tried to really apply that theoretical framework, this is what I came up with. Anti-Blackness is an endemic that is permeated across. And we see this with all participants. They experienced punishment for minor things. They weren't exposed to the Black deaf culture. They didn't have an opportunity to really grow solid in their identity. They are not viewed or valued. If anything, dehumanized in their experience. And so we see how it's permeated in K-12 education. The pervasiveness of whiteness, we notice that oftentimes the language, the culture of deaf individuals are according to white standards. Right? And how they sort of are superior in that way and maintain the values with the language and the culture. And then there's also oppression and power. When those two things exist, that's when we're experiencing that anti-Blackness. Hearingness as a property, right? That student who just had that auditory output and was penalized for that. So they have to sort of act like a hearing student in that deaf space. They can't hear themselves. They couldn't help it. And so instead of being punished for it, they could have been valued for that. And for the majority of my life in K through 12, I witnessed firsthand that hearingness as a property. And then intersectionality. Some not even learning about their identity until later in life. The erasure of the Black deaf culture. The act of time and time again putting that aside and prioritizing that white standard of deafness really takes away from the whole holistic viewpoint of it all. And then counter storytelling. It was amazing to be able to witness these participants share their raw stories, things that they've had to hold on to for years. And to give that space to challenge. Right, and we know that oppression exists. But to see their raw stories, for me, was enough. In conclusion, it's the same story, but a different time. We have students from as early as the 1960s to the 2020. And what we see is the trends that appear through that timeline. And what that clearly indicates is that we're not making any progress. The K through 12 system still is failing our Black deaf students. And so this is what impacted me the most, right? I mean, I thought that through time there might have been slight changes, perhaps some improvements, especially given the segregation period and desegregation period in the educational system, but still, same story, different time. So what does all of this mean? Now, all of the participants shared their own authentic stories. And I thought to myself, what can I do to support? What can I do to make sure that Black deaf students who are within the K-12 education system are seen? And what we can do are some practical interventions like racial identity development. Right. Going up through K through 12, that is a period in which you discover who you are. Not knowing your race, not knowing your culture, not knowing your history has a huge impact on our health and our identity development. And so what I feel is that what we need to do is encourage Black deaf students to embrace their Blackness. Counter spaces. Now, how many of you, I'm assuming the majority of you might identify as deaf, blind. How many of you all received your education in a deaf classroom or in a hearing classroom? And then which did you prefer? Right? Many of you are saying the deaf classroom, and that's because you have that shared identity. Right? You have that connection, that shared level of understanding, right? Learning about your own history, about your culture. And with that, we need to create that same space for Black deaf students. Not only in the physical space, but also in the curriculum. making sure that we incorporate Black Deaf history, making sure that they're not punished for being themselves, how we can uplift their Blackness. So creating those spaces and also engaging with parents. Oftentimes people think that everyone in the community has the same experience, but that's not true. We all have our own unique experiences, and having that space to share our narratives reaffirms this experience. Policy reforms, restorative justice. Again, many of the participants experience punishment, and oftentimes that brings a sort of feeling in which they can't feel like they're being their authentic selves. Right. And oftentimes how one can grow through an experience is through love, and not by destroying their self-esteem. And that's the best approach for discipline, is through love. Now with language policy. Three of the participants come from a Black family who are prominent users of Black ASL. And then there's also Black English that is used. And so a lot of the students express their interest in using Black ASL, using their Black English, but instead were forced to conform to the whiteness. Therefore, they felt oppressed, right? Having that desire to express in a way that they felt comfortable, but not being allowed to, right? So we see how the curriculum already oppresses them from being able to do so. And this is not to say that we shouldn't encourage bilingualism, but we should also encourage multilingualism. And using the Black Deaf critical framework, right? That I sort of came up through my research. Now, it took me 2 years to develop this, through community engagement, through narratives. And so I'm thankful to those who have supported me along the way through this journey. And I'm hopeful that future research can really highlight the harm that has been done, the violence that has been caused, and also not just within education, but perhaps with social work, psychology, all of these different fields, the medical fields, and how anti-Blackness has a really negative impact on Black individuals within the community. And feeling safe. Lastly, but not least, we really need to highlight the systemic violence that occurs through this experience. These stories, my goodness. Someone who identifies as a critical theorist, we could acknowledge that the system is there. And we can do our best to dismantle it, but truth be told, it's not going anywhere. We see that through our participants as early as the 1960s to 2020, their experiences are the same. And so what can we do? What can we do so that our Black children can thrive? How can we have that breakthrough through a system that is unjust? And what does that look like, right? How do we navigate liberation? And so we can talk all day about anti-Blackness and the different theories, but it's evident that it's not going to change. Right? This will exist long after I'm gone. And so for those future researchers out there, the future scholars, I really encourage you to focus on Black Deaf joy. How we can resist against the system and reaffirm ourselves. All right, I think I made it on time. Thank you so much.
We have about 20 minutes for Q&A. We also have our Zoom audience, so we do want to balance questions from in person and also on Zoom. We have plenty of time, so let's manage that well. So let's ask the folks in the room, anyone have questions for Dr. Akilah English about her presentation today? I can give you a moment to think about your questions and I can shift over to Zoom to see if any of the audience members has questions. All right, we have one question from an audience member. Hello, my name is Najma. I really appreciated your presentation. I'm thinking about the deaf community at large, and often there are misconceptions or misunderstandings about anti-Blackness, and they feel that anti-Blackness is only applicable to hearing Black and Americans. Can you share more about that?
Sure. So when I refer to someone as Black, it's anyone that comes from an African descent, regardless of whether they are currently an American. It could be someone who comes again from African descent.
Biracial.
It could be someone who's also biracial. Black is not just about their race, but their culture as well, their language. Now, in this specific study, I focused on Black Americans in the United States. Well, I believe, interesting enough, Pete, who graduated in 1996, he was Black, but he also noted another Black student that he knew who came from Nigeria. And both of them couldn't really get along because of the difference in values and in culture. And so Pete would often think to himself, both of us are Black. Why are we struggling to navigate this? And so that sort of led him to realize that internalization, right, that one might face, right? The views of a certain kind of Black culture. You have the American and then the non-American. And so a lot of that does exist. And it could be that you have those shared values, but again, you have to keep in mind those intersectionalities, right? We're not a monolith. We come from different backgrounds.
Thank you. Let's double check for the Zoom folks. Please do ask questions. Use the Q&A feature. It's on the bottom in the toolbar. Once you click on it, you can type in your questions. Now I'm going back to the audience in person. Any questions from folks here? Oh, from Dr. Pardon Singh. Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. This topic is very necessary. And I think it's really important for the deaf community and the community at large. So I'm thinking about the participants and their experiences. So I know that you only focused on their experiences as students, but I'm also wondering about educators who are Black and deaf. I grew up and taught in the South in Louisiana. And I remember going to school there and I did not have a lot of role models.
Even in college.
Even in college, there were not a lot of access to Black deaf educators. Of course, there might have been Black hearing educators, but I'm also wondering about the gap of deaf Black educators.
Now, out of the 6 participants, there was only 1 that had a Black deaf educator or a Black educator. The remaining 5 did not. And for that 1 participant, there was only 1 Black deaf educator that they knew. Now, when schools were segregated, there were many Black hearing educators, but once things were desegregated, all of those teachers lost their jobs. And so their first exposure in the classroom was a white educator. Right? And through time, there might have been Black educators, but they can count them on their hand, right? And oftentimes it wasn't until later in life where they had access to other educators or Black educators or BIPOC educators here at Gallaudet. And what we know is the deaf identity and the deaf culture is very prominent here at Gallaudet. And so they would feel conflicted because they finally were able to gain that experience here that they didn't get through their K through 12 experience, but they didn't again have that strong, proud Black identity.
Thank you. We do have a question on Zoom. The question is from Catherine Reyes.
Hi, Catherine. I'm so excited to see that you're asking a question.
How can allies best support the Black deaf community in achieving equity?
That's a good question. I think we all pretty much have said it. And I think it's evident that we have to work with them. We have to be able to trust them, and we have to be able to take lead. Right. And, you know, this is something that has been said time and time again, through literature, through articles. We see that for 60 years, Black deaf students have remained feeling devalued through their experience, and the system isn't going to change. And so with that, how you get out of that loop is by working with Black deaf people.
I have another question in the room. Thank you so much for your presentation today. It was really profound. I'm wondering from your participants, did they experience deprivation of Black ASL or any type of deprivation?
That wasn't a focus within my research, but that is something worth looking into for sure. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. We have another question from the chat on the Zoom. From FJ. Thank you for doing this presentation. It was very inspirational. I'm really curious. Can you provide more explanation about your PhD? Why did you choose to focus on deaf schools and not include mainstream school?
I intentionally didn't interview students from mainstream programs, and the reason why is because oftentimes not only is racism an issue there, there's also a challenge in accessing full communication, right? And so to experience those multi-layered impacts, I felt that it was important for me to actually interview students who I can see had a direct experience, had an experience relating to their race within deaf schools. Now, 80% of deaf students did graduate from a mainstream program. And so this study is applicable if one were to research within that realm. But for my specific research, I wanted to see how anti-Blackness existed in deaf schools, right? And then that might lead to other questions on whether this could be found among other deaf schools as well. And hopefully it can expand to focus on the education within deaf schools around the United States.
Thank you so much. This topic is very important. The question here in person. And I never learned a lot about deaf Black history. I felt we were forced to research and learn about white deaf history and about white systems, and was very colonizing. So I'm thinking about racial diversity in general. How can we change these education systems and curriculum? I'm thinking about now, like, we have social media and technology, and so much change has happened. So how can we now think about this? I mean, it's enough. I'm so tired of these systems.
Mhm. I'm so glad you brought that up. Now, though I highlighted the Black Deaf experience, I think this can exist within other cultures as well. And I think it's important for white people to know about this experience and this history. And the simple answer to your question is that we have to be intentional. It's not that there's not enough history. It's not about the curriculum. It's not about the resources. We have people out there. We have the library. You can dig and find. You might have to dig very deep, but you can find information. It is out there. And we just have to be intentional. So I think it's enough with that banter of not having enough resources. I've heard so many people that have tried to achieve something, but were hit with a wall. And so what could alleviate that is by having opportunities. If you want to know about the history, go to Georgia. I mean, there are still Black deaf people that exist that can share their stories. You don't sit and wait for an opportunity to fall on your lap, right? That's not how it works. You have to get out there and you have to be intentional.
All right, we have another individual who has a question on Zoom. It is pretty lengthy. Give us a second. This is from Sarita Cornwall. Thank you for your presentation. I have a few questions. And I just want to preface that there was a recent incident with my niece that really makes your presentation even profound. I'm wondering, how will Dr. English make her future research happen? What would that look like? Will it be published into books and online at deaf universities and schools? I would like to share more about my niece, who's 7. She's a bookworm. She was raised always to raise her hand. Her white classmate, who was a 8-year-old white deaf boy, was very envious of her because she was Black and brilliant than he is. He's been bullying her for a very long time. It led to him physically assaulting her, and this happened at the Ohio Deaf School in Columbus. So I do have these 2 questions about your research and how it'll be disseminated. And the story that you shared was so profound as I see it happen to my niece.
Well, I want to answer your second question. My dissertation is made public. Now, I do want to warn you, it is long. It's almost 200 pages. I actually met with Dr. Hill yesterday, so we're in works to sort of shorten it a little bit. But it's made public. You're more than welcome to view my work online. And then, what was that first question again?
Sure. I'm wondering what your goal is in terms of future research.
And then how it pertains to bullying. So I just want to make sure how my research could apply to those who want to look into the experience of bullying. Okay, so I did ask the participants if there were any white allies. Now, remember that student who had their shoe thrown out of the bus and was called the N-word, right? Not only did the teacher sort of dismiss their experience, we see that their peers can contribute to that as well. And so with that, we can think about how Black deaf students can resist and navigate that, because that experience isn't going to go away, right? But what we can do is come up with some tools that will help them advocate for themselves, because the system isn't going to help them advocate.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left. We have another question in person. Thank you so much for your presentation. You did mention religious briefly. And so from there, I'm wondering about just getting a clarification. 1 second, please. I'll rephrase my question. So you talked about religious happening, religious themes happening from your participants. And so it seemed that that one student felt excluded from sharing their experiences going to church. And I recall that this often happens when students come to Gallaudet, Black deaf students. They come with different experiences navigating their religious backgrounds, navigating experiences within their family. So I'm wondering that, does happen at Gallaudet? Does that happen through K-12 often?
That's a great question. With anything that we discuss, what's important for you to know is the oppression coming from whiteness, right? If you're talking about the educational disparities that one might face, and that is because of oppression. Those who come from a Black hearing family who have strong religious roots oftentimes have access to the information because they're hearing, right? And it's even more challenging for Black deaf students to have access to that as well. Oftentimes, Black families feel conflicted because they're not sure how to make sure that that information is shared. I went to church growing up. I remember sitting in service for 3 to 4 hours. We love to have an all-day service and people are singing and dancing, but I didn't understand a thing. And my family could have easily taken me to a deaf church, but they weren't aware of the resources that were available. And so my point is it's about access to information. It's about access to the culture. And oftentimes that is what gives us, that's what sort of takes away from our experience because we don't have that information passed down to us as a result of those communication and language barriers. If you remember Pete, right? He saw that there was an opportunity to go to church and he couldn't. And, there was no communication, right? They didn't explain to him why or how. And again, that's because of the foundation and the root of whiteness.
I have 2 questions here in the room, so we're trying to figure out the turn taking. So there's the comment. So we do have HBCUs. And they've done a lot of research to archive and document history from the Black experience.
Yeah, I think that it's a great initiative for you. I mean, we definitely need to create that partnership with HBCUs, right? 100,000%. I can agree with that.
Yeah, definitely to document K-12 experiences. Hello. So I am a candidate for a PhD program. And so I'm curious about your research design and your methodology.
I used a qualitative approach, more specifically narrative interrogation and what that means. Oh, correction, narrative inquiry. And what that means is that based on the set of questions that I had, we just had a conversation. right? And it was just a easy flowing conversation with those sort of parameters. As I shared earlier, a lot of the stories that were shared were raw and sensitive.
There were 3 parts to my interviews where we met 3 times because I really wanted to separate the different conversations that we had, and that allowed me to analyze their stories more in depth. All right, thank you so much for your presentation today. We are now going to wrap up. If you do have further questions, we're going to share Dr. Akilah's email. It is akilah.english@gallaudet.edu. Thank you so much and have a great day. Oh.